This video is sponsored by Squarespace. You can make your own beautiful website or online store with this all-in-one platform. Have you seen those color theory videos where one color looks completely different from another color, but then you find out they're actually the same color? Color theory can be really complicated and confusing when you're doing digital paintings or traditional paintings, but I kind of wanted to go through my process for color theory and talk about the rules of thumb that I have and sort of discuss what goes through my head when I'm doing a painting and having to choose the colors. It can be really challenging to choose an effective color palette for a painting that is both appealing, so you like the way it looks and it feels right, like it feels realistic and the lighting feels realistic, where nothing is standing out too much, it's not muddy, and you can actually tell what's going on in the painting. It has good readability. This can be challenging to achieve. There's a lot of moving parts. And what happens to me a lot is I will lay down the base colors and it's looking good, I like it, but at some point during the painting and shading process, it starts to get muddy and it loses that harmony that it used to have. Like as I add more details, I sort of get caught up in the colors and lose sight of the overall goal I had for the piece. I was looking into color theory and why we interpret certain colors differently than what their like actual color is, and this is called color constancy. I found this on James Gurney's website. James Gurney is a really great painter and I love watching his videos here on YouTube. But I found a page on his website from like 2010 talking about color constancy, and I found out what it was. It's something our eyes do, and it lets us interpret the colors of things around us in their various environments. In this example, the interesting thing is that the square on the left that is circled looks blue all the way through, and the square on the right that is circled looks red all the way through, but when you actually isolate those two colors, they are the exact same color. Your eyes are just really good at reading context clues and interpreting what the color is supposed to be in that particular instance. It's pretty cool. So it's the reason why we can tell that an apple is red under so many different lighting conditions. If it's in the dark, if it's in the daytime, if it's in golden hour, if you have like any sort of lighting, any imperfections the apple has, our eyes will still tell our brains that is a red apple. Even if it's technically made up of colors that aren't red, like if you took a picture of it and eyedropped it and it was more like gray or more purple or more orange, in real life, in the context of its environment and all the lighting and the objects around it, we can tell that it's red. This might not always apply with like extreme scenarios, like if you shine a super neon pink light on something, it might skew the colors beyond the point of being able to tell what they are. But for the most part, this is what our brains are doing when they're viewing objects under different lighting conditions. And it's something that is very natural for us to do, and it's really hard to turn off. And this is why it is a little bit complicated when it comes to painting. Another sort of example that I really like looking at, and I don't know if this counts as color constancy, but it kind of shows sort of an example. Snow is one of my favorite things to like look at the colors of, because snow is white. But if you want to paint snow, you're not just going to put white on your page. You need the shadows, but what color are the shadows going to be? You can make them gray, but a lot of the time I find that snow shadows are blue, like they're very saturated blue or cool toned. But our eyes still know that it's snow, and it interprets it as snow even more when we add these shadows. Our eyes don't see it as that's some snow that randomly turns blue, like we know like that's snow, that's white snow, and that's white snow in shadow. It's very interesting, and once you notice it, it's really fun to just kind of like look at snow and observe the shadows during like a snowy day. And of course, this depends on your art style and how realistic you want to go. Very simple styles might just use white for the snow, but I'm sort of talking about the kind of paintings that I tend to do where I do like to add a lot of details. It's not photorealistic and it's very stylized, but I do like to sort of shade things and give them some elements of realism. Now to thank this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is a website builder and you can create any kind of website you want. I use my website for my portfolio to show all of my favorite pieces of artwork that I've created over the years, curated in one place. It's cleaner than social media because I sort of pick and choose what gets displayed and in what order, and it's really easy to choose the order by using their portfolios and galleries tool. I actually recently updated my website with more pieces that I made this year, and it was very easy easy to just upload all of them, delete the old ones, drag and drop everything to rearrange it, and you can choose how the grid is aligned. It can be hard to know where to start out, so I always like to start with a template, and you can even use Squarespace Blueprint, which is sort of a custom template builder where you select different blocks you want on your website, and once you've filled out the sort of questionnaire, you have your very own customized template that you can then customize even further to suit your aesthetic. If you'd like to try out Squarespace, go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/JelArts for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. This painting, I think, was a good example of color theory because I realized some things while I was painting it, and I realized why I struggle painting certain color palettes. I actually restarted the colors of this painting a bunch of times because the orange brownish weevil was really throwing me off. I wanted the scene to be warm and made of fall colors and feel very like earthy and cozy, but also with like a sense of adventure and being outside and like a realism of the scene still being there. But the brown weevil was blending in too much with the brown leaves, and everything was sort of becoming too similar. Like the colors were looking too similar to each other, and it was hard to sort of tell what was going on in the piece. I did change some compositional elements, like I removed some branches that were making it a bit confusing, but it wasn't quite enough. But I'm going to tell you what I ended up doing. I knew when starting this that I usually struggle with overly warm paintings. I tend to use a lot of dark green in my work, a lot of dark green backgrounds. It's sort of what comes naturally to me and what I find easy and comfortable to paint. So the way I made the weevil stand out was starting by making the background different than the weevil. So I ended up changing the background from yellowy colors to blue. And at first I was like, this is not working with the rest of the piece. Like this blue is very out of place. But I slept on it, looked at it the next day, and I was like, actually, I think this is going to work if I add little hits of blue here and there in the background. Something else that I did was I took a very light grayish purple and I added it to the shadows of some of the really warm areas, and it sort of allowed like your eyes to see things better, and it gave a little bit more color harmony. It didn't look as like overly muddy and brown and like you just took all your warm colors and mixed them together. It gave it more interest. And then I was like, okay, I need to do more of this on this painting. I need to add some more cool colors. Despite me wanting the painting to be very warm, the cool colors allowed the warm colors to stand out more. And that's why color theory is all about contrast and the differences between the colors rather than the colors themselves. Another thing I did was I took a big soft brush and highlighted or like isolated the background and the background leaves, and I made sure I used a bluish purplish color. I put it on the blending mode screen, decreased the opacity, and that sort of let the background sit back from the midground and foreground a little more, and it let it be more readable for your eyes. And this is a nice trick to use for any digital art background or even traditional. If the background is a light color, you want the background to slowly transition into that color, and usually backgrounds become bluer and more grayed out as you get further away from the camera. Another thing that plays a big part, this is more apparent with traditional painting, but sometimes the color you want is not actually the color you need to mix. It's how you want the color to appear. The color that you're trying to mix with traditional art on your palette can look completely different once you actually hold your paintbrush up to the canvas and you see it in context with the rest of the colors that you chose. Luckily today we're talking about a digital piece that I made, so I didn't need to worry about mixing colors off of a palette, but this sort of applies to the color wheel. If you're selecting colors just from the color wheel to add to your painting, they might not be quite right. This is why I recommend using the eyedropper tool when you're actually rendering your piece. Eyedropping from various areas in your piece and incorporating those colors back into the piece can be a really effective way of adding harmony to your painting and just allows you to render a lot faster and like do an overpainting a lot faster. Sometimes I will choose new colors, but I usually use the eyedropper tool as a starting point. So if I see a color that's on the canvas, like orange, and I want a lighter highlight for that, I will eyedrop the orange, open the color wheel, shift it a little bit lighter, shift the hue a little bit warmer, and then that's my new highlight color. For a digital painting, a really good starting off point for lighting and shadows is to use blending modes like multiply, overlay, darken, screen. It allows you to apply lighting effects and shadows in one layer, in one brushstroke, so that each color is darkened and tinted evenly with the color that you selected. I don't like to leave it the way it is with just adding those layers. It's sort of a starting off point, and I end up painting over top of them, fine-tuning the shadows, adding some more varied color here and there, using a different color on the multiply layer depending on what you are shading. And eventually I achieve the look that I want. This is why practice makes perfect, so you develop an intuition for these sort of things. Also, I remember finding a tutorial on DeviantArt back when I was a beginner artist that really helped me figure out a simple rule of thumb for shading when you want stuff to look colorful and pop, or even more realistic when you just want a little bit more interest in your art. I can't find the exact tutorial since this was probably 10 years ago, but there's a lot of similar ones with the same sort of idea. So you eyedrop the base color, and if you would like to shade it, you sort of shift the cursor down the color wheel, the color picker diagonally, and shift the hue cooler. When you want to highlight, you move it lighter diagonally and shift the hue warmer. You just have to try out and see what looks best for your particular painting, and this is not a hard and fast rule. It's just something to try. It's something to experiment with, and I use this trick a lot. It's a good way to just make sure that your work isn't too grayed out and a little bit more colorful. So after going through all of that general advice, I want to talk about what goes through my mind when I start to color a piece. I look at the broad idea first. What's the general feeling I want the piece to have? This one, I wanted it to be warm, cozy fall colors. And what I am always thinking about when I'm painting is for an appealing color palette, readability, so you can tell what is going on in the painting and things don't get lost, composition, does it feel balanced, and the values. Values are just as important as colors. It is the lightness and darkness of the colors, and a good way to check your overall contrast is to create a new layer with gray and set it to the layer mode color and put that on top of everything, and it will show your piece in black and white. Desaturating your piece doesn't give the same effect as putting a gray layer on color mode, because different colors have different lightness and darknesses. Like, it's sort of hard to explain, but the hue of a color can impact the value, and when you do it with the layer method, you see it more true to how your eyes will perceive it in color, if that makes sense. So then I start to drop in all the colors roughly. I get the general idea of where I want certain color groups to be, and I make sure there's like a foreground, middle ground, background. If that's the kind of piece I'm doing, I make sure it looks balanced, and then I will eyedrop as I go and add details as I go. And every new color I add, I always base it off a color that is already on the painting. Then I sort of like go in and color each object individually. So I will like actually color things in on top of that like rough base layer of like blurred colors and like general ideas of where things are gonna go. Once I do all the base layers, I start to think about the shadows and the highlights. And once I get the shadows and highlights down, I create a new layer on top of the line art or sketch, and then I start to paint over top of everything. Sometimes I don't paint on top, sometimes I paint below the line art, and I do most of the details before the line art, under the line art layer, and then do finishing touches on top. I really like to paint over top of the lines because I think it really helps everything blend together and gives it a really good sense of harmony, and it allows you to soften edges, which can help a lot with making things sit back more. It allows you to sharpen edges, which can make them sit forward more in the composition. It allows you to make the subject have more detail than the background so that you can tell what you're supposed to be looking at. It's really a push and pull when it comes to the end, and then eventually I am finished. That's sort of my general process. I don't always do line art. Sometimes I will do a sketch, this Weevil drawing. I did not do line art, I painted over the sketch, but sometimes I'm in a line art mood, so I will do detailed lines and color it very in the lines, and then once I'm done, I do finishing touches on top. But for coloring a sketch, I am less detail oriented. I'm more like focusing on the brush strokes, creating shapes of color. Those are sort of my two different digital art styles. I think I made a video about this recently that I go into more depth, so you can check that out if you want. I really hope you enjoyed this video about color theory, just some like general advice and tips and things that I've sort of picked up on the way. I really hope this helped you learn a couple of things about how to approach color theory and how to paint a piece, especially digitally. Overall, I really like how the Weevil painting turned out. It was a big struggle, honestly. Like, you can probably tell in the time lapse, I changed my mind a lot with the colors, and I was really struggling with it until I sort of leaned into adding more cool colors, and the cool colors ended up making it feel even more warm because of the contrast between the warms and the cools. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next video.